Hi.
Hi. Hi, Anne, and hola a todos los que están allá afuera, escuchando esta conversación con la maravillosa Anne Boyer. Anne, is that how I pronounce? I'm sorry.
Boyer, but
Boyer.
yeah.
I made it really fancy.
You made it fancier. I appreciate it.
Sorry. Anne, con la maravillosa Anne Boyer. Sobre su increíble libro Desmorir, una reflexión sobre la enfermedad en un mundo capitalista, traducido por Patricia Gonzalo de Jesús, y con esta hermosa portada. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, against all odds, against lightning and, all kinds of stuff. When I heard that your power had gone out, this happens. I live outside Mexico City now, and in the countryside, it happens all the time. So I was like, no problem. Let's
just angry gods. Angry gods. They don't like our electricity. They want the stars instead. So
yeah. That what you just said about the stars made me think of something that would maybe make us start the conversation in a totally different place, but maybe I'll hold off on the stars for a little bit. I wanted to start, I'm a big, lover and fan of Kathy Acker. And I thought maybe it would be a nice place to start with, literary friends. Clearly, it seems that you love her work as well. Your whole reflection on how she dealt with her illness, and for people out there who don't know who Kathy Acker is, she's an amazing writer, author of many groundbreaking, I think, books, like Empire of the Senseless, Blood and Guts in High School, so many amazing books. And she died of breast cancer in 1996, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, yeah.
And at the time, there wasn't a name for that kind of specific cancer, which is perhaps the same kind that you had.
Yeah, we don't know, right? And so what I did, I became so infuriated by these kind of accounts of her life that seemed to blame her for her own death.
Exactly.
Or that they cast the cancer patient as this kind of moral actor where obedience equals life and disobedience equals death. And so I had the opportunity to talk about Kathy Acker with the release of the Chris Kraus autobiography. There was an event in New York, and it gave me the chance. I was like, well, I can just do the math, right? Because I'd been studying my own cancer and statistics and figuring out probabilities and treatments. And I said, well, I'm going to try to reconstruct from the available information whether what they say is true, whether these decisions that she made were deadly, like self-immolating decisions, or if they were reasonable decisions, even if they were based on instinct and desire, as opposed to the science. Yeah, science is cool calculations. And it seems to me as if had she made different decisions, she might well have died, and she might well have died in a much grimmer, tortured way. And this notion that everyone with cancer or everyone with a deadly disease is supposed to subject themselves to endless, heroic nonsense interventions at the end of their life, it offended me. And it offended me more because, this is probably so many people, Kathy Acker represented a one-woman feminist avant-garde. She was this breath of of dark hope, right? For me, who's well, I want to find literature that's not softly sentimental or a reductive feminist literature. I want to find this really adventurous form and language and expansiveness. So I had such an attachment to her. And I felt, and I still feel, and I talk about it in the book, she's not the only case of women writers being blamed for their own death, sometimes just in the most ludicrous ways. Margaret Fuller was blamed for drowning in the ocean in a shipwreck. Like if she hadn't been holding on to her book manuscript, she would have survived. This is the story people told about her. And so I felt like the book gave me this opportunity to make the case for Kathy Acker, for freedom around our choices that we make, in some ways for instinct, right? For like what we know to be true, even if we don't have the way to know it, like the way, the established way of knowing it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like through her, you also make the case for rage and for, you know, for other ways, as opposed to the, you know, smile and that kind of like smile and all will be well,
Right.
you know, culture that surrounds cancer, especially I feel, and it also surrounds women's, like, you know, women in general. So it's like, you know, you're supposed to be really nice and polite at, you know, department meetings, and, you know, God forbid you're an angry Black woman, you know, it's like, all of
this, so much of it is racialized too, like white women, Black women, like there's different ways we're supposed to comply, right? Mm-hmm. But this kind of like effective control, the way women are supposed to feel, what we're supposed to feel about, how we're supposed to express feelings, the way we're supposed to feel for other people, but not ourselves. Like that, which is a position I found myself interpolated in with cancer, that I would find myself so worried about other people's responses to my cancer that I couldn't feel my own rage and sadness, because I was like, oh, this person has rejected me. I feel so sorry for them. They're having such a difficult time.
Yes, like other people's fragility or whatever.
Right.
People tend to.
This like totally oppressive socialization. And then like, I think always at these moments of trauma or catastrophe or even just change, like when people have children or people get ill or whatever else, all the ideology just becomes these like huge monstrous forms that descend on us. And even if we think we're free, it's like, oh no, it's just there. They still have us. Like we still have to wrestle with them. That personal liberation or personal growth is never going to get you as far as changing the world does.
Yeah, and I feel like that's another. I mean, your book is many things, which is why I'm, you know, so in awe of what you did and so admiring. I was preparing for this interview. I had so many things to say that I was like, where do I start? I'm so excited and, you know, and in awe of what you did. And one of the things I think that is at the core of your sort of, of the incandescence of this book is that what you just named, the fact that we are made individually responsible for a systemic collective illness of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the weight of that illness that the world has caused. It is an illness of the world, of history. You consistently go back to history, and our bodies inserted in history, and the illness as you know, the history of the illness as the history of the world in the mm-hmm. book. And it sort of becomes like this individual thing, as if you and your personal positive attitude or your personal obedience or disobedience to your doctors. I love the baby face.
Poor Dr. Baby.
He cracked me up, and you decided, you know, no, he's not, you know, I'm not going to go with him. I'm going to change doctors. And then I'm sure several friends were probably, you know, are you sure? Are you, you know, is this the best decision? So it all boils back down to us, right? To mm-hmm. us as individuals, and as opposed to like the problem or the illness is in the system that charges you insane amounts of money for chemotherapy that sometimes people don't even need.
I know, ritual chemotherapy. That's the thing that's appalling, is it's just a ritual. I mean, medicine so much. I mean, I think doctors and nurses, I've met through the courses, there's so many like just totally insightful, generous healthcare practitioners, and they know it too. Right. They know, for example, that cancer treatment's not always based on science, that this idea that there's some sort of like the cool calculating hand of science that guides all is not true. They know the ritual elements, the like emotional depravity of it. They know. I was thinking about this today because I'm tortured about my future work. I'm like really, really stymied about my next books and what I do and what I may have done wrong in The Undying or what I want to correct or how I want to go. And I was thinking, oh, did I make a mistake in The Undying? I'm trying to get the whole, like the totality, right? Like, did I just confuse people? I think every writer goes through this stuff. But then I was like, had it just been personal, had I personalized what happened to me, it would have been unbearable. Like it just would have been unbearable, and it wouldn't have been true because it wasn't just me. I mean, I had to put my own, I think there was some point at which I was like not going to put my own self in it as much. And then, well, that's a lie too, because we in fact exist both in these feelings and in the world, and they produce or co-produce each other. And I'm just as vulnerable as anyone reading it or anyone else. And I have to speak to the fact that I live inside myself too, that I'm vulnerable too, but that the world exists out there. And, I did it. It's like that choice of trying to capture what almost seems like too vast and complicated, right, for a book. It's like, but I did it because I'd go crazy if I hadn't had the chance to do it. Because I would have said, oh, like I smoked that cigarette or I ate that hot dog or I didn't follow that rule. Like it was all me. I did it. I made catastrophe with a single choice. And it's not true. I can't let other people think it's true of themselves. And in fact, we live in a world with each other, right?
Yeah, and I think that's also, among all the many wonderful things that your book does, it is a very generous book. At some point you say, and I'm going to just paraphrase in English because I have the Spanish, but when you say, this book is for those who are ill, will be ill, have been ill, meaning all of us. We're all in this sort of sick world. We are the sick, it's like we're all sick and the world is sane, or the world is sick and then maybe we are healthy, or it just becomes this political argument also within the very personal moments. You always, I feel like, point toward the collective, and you never allow the sort of this thing about individualizing or internalizing what is wrong or the illness, or to just stay there. It is there and it is also outside. And that, I feel like that's enormously generous for the reader. And so it may feel right now that you were like, doing all these things, but as a reader, I was just like, this is brilliant. This is so generous at the same time as you're like saving yourself perhaps from madness, from everything. It was just like this constant back and forth between what could be called, I guess, a memoir and what is like a political tirade against the situation. It's so I was really like, thank you so much. And, I was like, will I ever get to meet her? And then I did.
Well, I'm glad you say this. It's so, being a writer is so strange. I still don't understand how any of us do it sometimes, where like it seems a bit of a mad endeavor. And so that second guessing of oneself is just always kind of lurking there. It's lurking there through the entire composition of any book. And then every conversation that comes afterwards, you think, did I do it right? Did I do my best? Did I express myself in a way that other people can find this useful or meaningful or at least productive, even if I don't know, like productively disagreeable, even if they find it.
Generatively destructive.
Yeah, generatively destructive.
No, I did. I think, obviously many people did and will continue. I think this book, and maybe this is a really cheesy thing to say, but it really is I feel like a book for the ages, and how you describe. So there's two things. Now I want to go all over the place. Two things. One, I would like to discuss, and since we're talking about writerly moments of oh, what is it that I'm doing? Early on in the book, you said you feared for your vocabulary, and then I read you, and there's like this overflow of abundance when it seems like everything is trying to dry you up from the inside, right, and kill you from the inside, and your exuberance, is so alive, and it's just in your language. Like your vocabulary survived, and how did you do that?
Well, no, but it didn't. This is the horrible part of that question, is that I'm not what I was before. I guess I'm different. See, there's a poet named Lisa Robertson, a Canadian poet. She's probably one of my favorite writers. And she told me when I first got diagnosed and I found out that chemotherapy caused brain damage and destruction to the language centers, and I was just terrified. And she's like, well, the mind isn't just the connections in the brain. That like the mind finds a way to like reroute, to heal itself. This was the best thing, because my terror was twofold. My terror was that the damage that chemotherapy, like the cost of staying alive, was going to cost me my ability to use the one thing I had going for me, which was this kind of creative intelligence, this like writerly intelligence. And that was the thing I always loved about myself. I could hate everything else, but I was like, hey, but at least I can write a poem. Like, at least I can do these, at least I have a vocabulary. I was worried about that. I was also worried just about the degradation of the vocabulary and the reduction of cancer culture. That I would be kidnapped into the language of the illness, and I would be kidnapped into the sentimental or exploitative narratives that are around the illness, and that I would never come back from it, right? That I would just somehow, be like drawn into the cliche and never able to crawl back out of the cliche again. And so these, the entire time I'm in treatment, this struggle to language is the struggle. I think I gave up so much of the territory of my brain. I can't remember where my keys are. I can't remember where my car is parked. I completely can't keep hold of gossip. I don't remember who wronged who anymore, because I was like, if there's one thing about my brain that I want to retain, it's words. And so I just trained myself. It's like, I can forget everything else. I can forget to pay my bills, right? I can forget my own birthday, but I can't forget words. And so I try to wore the groove in my mind, and I am still able to write. It's good, right? Like, I'm glad I can. So,
and I think I think we are glad with you and thankful for your self-training in that sense. And if I may, I'm just going to read a little fragment in Spanish now that we're speaking of words, because I would love people who haven't read the book to get a sense of the power of your words here. I'm just going to read this little part, and bear with me. And I also want to say the translation is amazing, because it's, I feel like I can hear the echoes of the English in here in the best possible sense. And I know that you also translate, so you were probably.
It's just an amazing edition. The art, everything about it. It's like sort of, again, in a writerly thing, it's sort of a dream come true when you meet translations that get it. And then when you meet book design that also gets it.
Yes.
It's so exciting.
Yes. And as I'm bilingual, and I can sometimes, when a translation just sort of falls apart, everything falls apart. And I'm just like, I'm just going to go back to the English in this case, because I can. And in this case, I just read the whole thing in Spanish. I was so inspired and so in awe of Patricia's work. And then I was, then I went back and read the English all over again. So, and it's just like, they're both amazing. Dice así: nos dicen que el cáncer es un intruso contra el que hay que luchar, o una faceta descarriada de nosotros mismos, o un tipo de célula demasiado ambiciosa, o una analogía del capitalismo, o un fenómeno natural con el que convivir, o un determinado agente de la muerte. Nos dicen que está en nuestro ADN, o nos dicen que está en el mundo, o nos dicen que se encuentra en esa confusa encrucijada de genes y entorno que nadie puede ni quiere encontrar. Se nos da únicamente la parte ruidosa de la probabilidad, que su causa se encuentra en nuestro interior, y nunca la parte silenciada de la probabilidad, que la fuente del cáncer permea nuestro universo compartido. Se examinan nuestros genes, no nuestra agua potable. Escanean nuestro cuerpo, no nuestro aire. Nos dicen que se encuentra en lo erróneo de nuestros sentimientos o en lo inevitable de nuestra carne. We were just talking about that. Nos dicen que hay una diferencia entre enfermedad y salud, entre lo que es agudo y lo que es crónico, también entre vivir y morir. Vemos las noticias sobre el cáncer en el mismo tipo de pantallas que las noticias sobre las elecciones. Las recibimos en nuestro correo electrónico junto con las invitaciones a LinkedIn. Las almohadillas de los radiólogos son las mismas que las de los pilotos de drones. La pantalla que radia el cáncer es también la pantalla que radia todo el terror global y la irrealidad mediados. El cáncer no parece real, el cáncer parece un alienígena al que la modernidad capitalista industrial, a base de insistir, ha convencido para tener un encuentro semiastral, semisensorial, todo terrible. El tratamiento contra el cáncer es un sueño del que solo nos despertamos a medias para descubrir que ese medio despertar es otro capítulo en el libro del sueño, un sueño que es un documento y un recipiente tanto del despertar como del dormir, de cualquier placer y de todo el dolor, del insoportable sinsentido y con él todo el sentido en erupción, cada momento del sueño demasiado dilatado para olvidarlo y cada recuerdo de él amnésico. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That passage, as I said, that passage is sort of, for someone who hasn't read the book, that's the actual just like nucleus.
Yes, that tells you a lot about all the connections that are sort of going through your body and and radiating out of it. And another thing that I thought was really, a core argument that is very strong in your book is the idea that when you do self-care, and I feel like there's a huge culture about self-care in the world in general, even in certain kinds of feminism and so on. And when you do self-care, structurally nothing changes. Again, it remakes it about the individual. And when you are enraged, which is sort of, in cancer world, like the opposite of self-care, like you're supposed to be, doing mindfulness and meditation and juicing and I don't know, doing all kinds of
juicing and breathing. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and letting go and letting God, and I don't know, like a ton of cliches that you mentioned, like all of that is what you're supposed. And here you are, sort of doing the opposite.
Yeah,
you're like, holding on to dear life with all, like, with your teeth and your and your wig and your silk robe, like secondhand silk robe. And I'm like, God, I want to be your friend, and literally you're holding on, your nails are falling off. I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. It sounds like you were there because that's exactly what it felt like. It just absolutely, yeah. I mean,
you took me there.
So whenever anyone asks me, they say, "Oh, my friend has cancer. What do I do?" And I'm like, "Well, you remember that they're themselves. Like you remember what's individual about them. You remember what they love and who they are, and don't objectify them as a patient. Don't generalize them into invisibility or like pity them into non-existence or like cliche them to the grave." And so for me, right, like the way that I survived is not the way that anyone else survived. I just survived with this like absolute insistent like absurdity, excess, anger, like poetic disbehavior, right? Like doing crazy things I wasn't supposed to do. Like all of that, my like a troupe of like bizarre queer friends, like all sort of descending in upon me, but that's not everyone. And and I want to make it clear that if you need to juice and breathe, you should juice and breathe. And it is not the juicing and the breathing that's the problem. It's the sense that we all become generalized out of our own existence or objectified. That's the problem.
Exactly. And that again, the root of the illness might be found within you, and therefore, healed in these, whichever way, when indeed what makes us ill is the world, right? And what makes the illness go one way or another way is also structural inequality, which you make
it is. It's not only that, but it is also
a lot of that.
And the statistics around breast cancer are devastating, and they're devastating because, at least in the United States, they represent the history of racial inequalities. They represent, even sort of around the margins of the statistics, the sort of hidden inequalities of family structure, neighborhood, and class. And because the type of breast cancer I have, it normally is women of color have this type the most. It was the one in which the innovations hadn't happened, in which the treatment was the same old destructive treatment. And so there I was, a white woman, but encountering, right, this legacy of systemic racism in the United States and in science. I mean, not just in the United States, but just like in this sort of Western practice of science all around. And so that's not everything about what happens to you. But the fact that we don't, that the acknowledgement of these sort of networks of interlinking inequalities, that's not acknowledged in the larger discussion. It was heartbreaking too, because it was like these even the exclusions themselves, like the exclusions of the facts, are heartbreaking along with the facts.
Yes, but then the sort of keeping quiet about them just makes it all that much worse, even though they're so painful. And there's so many parts of the book where you clearly make a decision to speak out, despite the fact that speaking out might be enormously painful to yourself, and also, hard to read or hard to digest for many. But it's just, I feel like it had to be said, and you did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that writers in general need to get together and have a conversation about traumatizing yourself through your writing, right? Because it's just like an absolute real risk. And the book took me too long because it is difficult. And so for readers, if you're not a writer, but for every reader who picks up a book about difficult subjects, is like, there is just I don't know, like this weird corrosion or like that happens to writers during the process. And it made me like, oh gosh, when I finished it, I was just like, the way that I read anything ever again, the way that I now read books I don't even like, and I'm like, oh, think of the human investment in this, right? Like think of the cost. It was quite an education, and the dangers of writing. There's this wonderful book. I don't think it's been translated into Spanish. It's Books Proved Fatal to Their Authors. I think it's an 18th century catalog of everyone who died from writing their own book. And I was like, oh, this was like on my desktop. So it's like open copyright. And I just would keep this PDF up. I was like, oh, writing a book is dangerous business.
Yes, indeed. And somehow I feel like it's also the business that saves.
Yeah, ultimately it does, doesn't it?
At least that's what I felt from this book. It was, it was the pain and but also what, this sort of beacon of somewhere to go, or some, I don't know, like a respite or refuge. I don't know what to call it.
Well, there's other thing, and that was, it was like the debt of gratitude, the feeling that I lived. And then that's actually this really overwhelming feeling, especially when you know people who die, right? And you can't tell the difference between why you lived and why they didn't. And then how to unburden yourself of the debt of gratitude is a real question. I think anybody who's been through a serious illness, or even just a serious trauma, and taken sort of a lot of care required something from everyone else to survive. And so the book gave me the opportunity to figure out something of an answer to the problem of, well, what do I do now? Not just with the rage, but like with the love. Like, what do I do with all that? And so the book, while it was difficult to make, it's like this, I feel like I gave something back, right? So that's good.
Yeah, and it's, to me, that which is why I feel like the love that went in is also revealed at the end of the book when you talk about friendship. And you never make it just an easy, simple thing where it's like, well, thanks to my friends, I survived. It's not just that. It's like, there is that too. And there's also the enormous you were like, clearly people were helping you, but there was also an enormous loneliness, even when in company of, your darling friends who brought you the silk second or whatever, who would like watch movies with you and so on, and how those things are together. They're happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
You are being saved by your friends while being profoundly alone.
Well, this is the thing. This is what I write about it in the book, but what I found so pernicious was that sense of alienation and loneliness. And I think part of that, I think for people who experience a lot of physical pain, probably every single person who experiences severe physical pain recognizes the loneliness of it, that this is part of maybe the phenomenon of it is at least the illusion of being isolated. And I had to, the book also gave me the opportunity to work through that, to not just believe it, to not just believe I was alone. And it was striking, the desolation that kept coming on to me, even as my friends were in the other room and I would be in my bed and I would feel like I was the loneliest person in the world. And I had no explanation for it. I think I had never actually felt it before like that. And my feeling, hearing and talking to other people who have serious illness, is that this happens. Like, this is part of the phenomenon, or at least the phenomenon as we currently experience it in this particular society, is that alienation, that loneliness just overtakes all. It's just like this demon that you have to fight off all the time.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of this part in the book where you say, again, paraphrasing in English, which lives deserve to be lived and which don't, and if this burden that you mention, or this sort of responsibility maybe, where it's like, well, how come? And you speak of this other YouTuber who had the same kind of cancer as you, and more or less like similar timelines. And she died and you didn't. And I feel like this book is also for her.
Well, watching her, like, and this was the other thing I had to capture in the book, is that there are all these sort of wonderful literature of cancer, Sondheim and Audre Lorde, but nobody had it with the internet on. Like, I couldn't find a book where you have cancer with the internet on, and I had cancer with the internet, right? Like, me and the internet had cancer together. Yeah. And I think every person who gets a serious illness knows, like, the Google and the discussion boards and the vloggers and the whole network. And Coop Dizzle, the person whose vlog that I found and followed, and who we shared these kinds of experiences, it was, I don't know how to say, like, that something about that connection to her and then her death was so, like, unbelievably devastating and meaningful to me. And I have to say this, is that the book talks a lot about sort of canonical literature of illness and ancient literatures of illness, but her vlog was just as meaningful to me as Susan Sontag. Right, like, it was all mixed up there together. Like, John Donne and Coop Dizzle, like, were on the same shelf.
Yeah, and I feel maybe perhaps because illness makes, the great equalizer in that sense, and she and her experience can be as profound and deep, and it doesn't matter that it's on, like, YouTube or whatever, as John Donne, prostrate and
listening to the church bells.
Speaking of which, that part, I love that part where you have this like brief sort of thought about being in bed and looking up at the like this like the positionality of illness. Like that could be a whole other like new seed for a book. So interesting what happens to the body, but the mind in bed and just looking at, you know, the heavens.
Well, I haven't stopped thinking about it because so I was like, so the book is two rectangles. It's the bed and the computer screen, right? That I just toggle back and forth between these things. But I'm obsessed with the stars and stargazing. And I was writing a thing about how when you stand up, like to look up always feels really precarious because it's like your head's about to fall off your spine. But how do you see like falling stars? Unless you do this like precarious act. Well, so illness gives you a different kind of precarious act. Like John Donne talks about the problem with being ill is you lay down on your sick bed and it may become your deathbed. You don't know when you're going to wake up again. And it's a terrifying experience. So there's the kind of precarity of the posture of illness, the sick bed. But then when we get up again, if we still want to look at the stars, like we take another risk, like another kind of vulnerability. Because like when you have your head up and you're looking at the stars, just about anybody could like sucker punch you or something, right? Like you're moving away from the safety of eye contact with your fellow species and like daring the sky to show you what it has. And so it continues, like these postures of thought and of observation, like just because the book's written, I still keep thinking, you know, it doesn't mean I haven't stopped thinking about these things.
No, that part, you know, it's still echoing in my mind. I was like, oh, yes. And indeed, yeah, I guess looking at the stars, it's like you're opening like completely vulnerable area to the world and to the beyond or whatever.
But if you don't do it, you don't see falling stars. Like, I mean, there's a real risk there, right? It's like, imagine you go through your entire life and you don't see the stars.
Yeah, what is definitely a greater risk.
Yeah.
Among many other things, I mean, I guess we don't have that much time left, even though I feel like I could go on 3 more hours. I wanted to briefly discuss the titles of your book. And I'm wondering if you could tell us, talking about writerly things, if you like the title in English is not the same as the title in Spanish. And I found 2 titles in English, and I thought maybe one is like the title in the US, perhaps the other one in the UK.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what you thought. So maybe I'll tell the audience in case they don't know. So the title in the United States, just to be very precise, is The Undying: Pain, Vulnerability, Mortality, Medicine, Art, Time, Dreams, Data, Exhaustion, Cancer, and Care. That's the US title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the British title is The Undying: A Meditation on Modern Illness. And then the Spanish title is closer to, but not exactly the same as that one. It is Desmorir, or The Undying, una reflexión sobre la enfermedad en un mundo capitalista. And I feel like the variations are,
well, I can say how this happened, right? So how this book is titled everywhere is just an endless source of fascination to me, because in some languages people make up words. Some places they don't want to make up words. Some place they want to make it kind of normal. And some place they want to take the risk and like make it extreme or reveal its politics. I love the Spanish subtitle. Mm-hmm. I think the Spanish subtitle does a very good job of expressing this in the book. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm attached to the American subtitle because that's the one that I was like, they'll never let me. And I had my editor for The Undying here, who's now one of my best friends, like the absolutely perfect editor. And he let me be so strange. And I was like, they'll never let me. He's like, oh yeah, let's go for it. right? And it's not as if he had like a considerable amount of power as the publishers or whatever. He was just like, we're just going to take this risk because he's somebody who believes so strongly in literature and like the literary aspects of literature and formal innovation, that he was like, you can make a title like no one's ever had before, and I'm going to stand there with you. What I was told in the UK is, well, readers are more conservative here. They don't want a title like that. And so I was like, okay, why? But I mean, it didn't do as well in the UK. Maybe it would have done better had it had a title that revealed the context a little bit more, right? And so it's been an adventure to watch it. My gratitude of like there's rare occasions when you meet an editor and the editor just actually, how do I say this? He deepened my weirdness. He didn't just permit it. He was like, okay, right.
He's owned it.
Yes. He was like, I wanted so badly, like when the book won the Pulitzer, it was so sad because he had just been let go from the press, and the whole dream that I had about any kind of recognition the book was get is that I just wanted to shine the light on him, which is like to have a great editor, like an editor who truly believes in the capacity of literature, not just to imitate previous literature, but to make new forms of the world. The book couldn't have existed that way if I had had somebody more cowardly or conservative or who didn't recognize that the book was also literature, not just politics or cultural critique, but he was there. His name is Jeremy Davis. He was there for to make it all happen. And so like, I don't know, editors don't get enough credit. Editors, book designers, copy editors, all of them, like for every book we read, the amount of human labor and ingenuity and intelligence that goes in is always just astonishing. So.
Yeah. A debt of gratitude to Jeremy then for letting this be a strange, weird, trans-genre, wonderful, hard, beautiful, painful, furious, soft, sweet, vulnerable book that it is. It's like my description is a little like your title is just like, but it is, a debt of gratitude to him and to Sexto Piso for translating it.
Well, and I feel as if Sexto Piso got it. Like they got it too. I'm just so, as I said before, but I'm so happy with this edition, and it feels really remarkable to be sort of recognized or understood in an edition that comes out someplace else in a different context, in a different language. But it's I don't know, an unrivaled experience to have that happen.
How lovely, how exciting, and how, to me also, I picked it up. I would have obviously picked it up with the long title also because, I love that kind of flow. And as I just read that little fragment, it speaks to the flow of your work and also your poetry, because thanks to this, I started reading your poetry. And they're very related.
Yeah.
I mean, this book has parts that could be a prose poem. I mean, like I said, it's a trans-genre book. But also the subtitle that did stay in Spanish with the, illness in a capitalist world, was what made me, I picked it up randomly from a Sexto Piso book, like big warehouse sale. And I was like, ooh. First I looked at the cover, I was like, oh, I love that cover.
I know, I would pick the book up with that cover, right?
Which is always, like check. Yes. I also love the American cover with the snake and the needle.
Yes. Again, I mean, so this is it's ridiculous because I just like glow when I think about the work of the designers on some of these editions. But truly, like both covers, you don't expect it. You actually, so this is the thing of being a writer. You hear all these horror stories about like the process of production that misreads or misunderstands the words. And when it doesn't, like when you're met, it I don't know. Again, it's just a gift. I don't come to expect it again. Like, I feel so lucky that this happened. And I do, the thing I really appreciate about the Spanish subtitle is it also structures the conversation in a way that I like because it gives some guidance, right, about what I meant to do or what I tried to do inside the book.
Yeah, the politics behind it.
Yeah.
And so so that's why I picked it up. And then I was like, oh, I didn't know your work, like I said. And I was like, oh, is she French? Is she, And then I was like, oh, wait, no, she's American. Wow, okay. And then I was like, oh, and then I went and looked, I'm like, I looked at your poetry, and I'm like a huge fan of your work, and I hope that it will keep getting translated. All of it, also the poems. And I want to thank you for your time and for your.
Oh, I think it was a wonderful conversation. I hope we get to meet in person soon.
Me too. I really do. I think you may come to the festival in Querétaro, hopefully.
Yes. I'll be in Mexico. I can't wait. I love Mexico.
Yay.
I might not come home.
Well, but thank you again. And thank you for the book, really.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.